5 LLC mistakes that creators make that can cost them almost everything. So most creators think that having an LLC means that they're protected. And really, they're not alone. Because even just one simple mistake can completely destroy that protection. And most people don't even realize that they're making these kinds of mistakes. So today, I'm going to share with you exactly what mistakes I'm talking about and how to fix them before they cost you everything. Stick around. Welcome back to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and for more than 3 decades, I've worked with creators, media producers, entertainment companies, helping them build and protect the businesses behind their ideas. Lately, what we've been talking about is something I call the modern media mogul mindset. It's the idea that creators shouldn't just think about making content, but they should really be thinking also about building a real business on top of and around that content. Now, in the last episode, I talked about something fundamental. Modern media moguls understand that if you want your podcast to power a real business, the structure comes first. The company becomes the container that holds the brand, the content, the revenue, and the relationships. But here's the important part. Creating that container is only step one. You also have to use it correctly. And that's where many media creators run into trouble. And stick with me because I'm going to be sharing some mistakes. And the third one is a doozy that surprises almost everyone. Now, I've seen it over and over again. A lot of creators fall into the trap of thinking, they're doing things right. They form that LLC, they file the paperwork, they get the confirmation email from the state, and then maybe even they frame that document or something. But then they think, okay, I'm protected now. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Forming an LLC is really only the beginning. Because if you run the company incorrectly, that protection can disappear. In fact, I've seen creators spend the time and the money of forming an LLC only to accidentally undermine the protection it was supposed to provide just by making some simple mistakes. So today we're going to talk about 5 of these most common LLC mistakes that creators make and how to avoid them. Because modern media moguls don't just create companies, they run them correctly. So it's a common misconception about the LLC is that forming the company automatically creates the protection. But that's not exactly how it works. Yes, the LLC creates a legal structure, and that structure can separate the individual from the business, but only if the company is actually run like a business. Think of it this way. If you start a business, but everything still runs through your personal bank account, if all the contracts are signed in your personal name instead of in the name of the company, if the brand and intellectual property are owned personally, then the company is really just a paper tiger, just exists mostly on paper. Well, modern media moguls understand that the structure only works if the business actually runs through the structure. So let's talk about these mistakes that will sometimes weaken that structure. Number 1 is mixing personal and business monies. This is the number 1 issue I see with creator businesses. Personal money and business money all mixed together. Maybe podcast revenue goes into a personal account. Maybe expenses are paid with personal credit cards. Maybe there's no real separation between the business finances and the creator's personal finances. From a legal standpoint, this creates a problem. One of the core ideas behind the LLC is its separation. The company is supposed to operate as its own entity. Separate finances reinforce that separation. When everything is mixed together, it becomes harder to show that the business and the individual are truly distinct. That's why one of the first practical steps after forming an LLC is opening a business bank account where the income flows into the company and into that account, expenses flow out of the company. That simple change reinforces the structure that you created. Another mistake I see all the time is creators signing contracts personally instead of through their company. A creator forms an LLC, but then when it's time to sign a sponsorship agreement or a partnership agreement or a vendor contract, they sign the agreement in their own name, not the company's. Now, that might seem like a small detail, but it can really matter. If the individual signs the agreement personally, the contract may treat that as the individual as the responsible party, not the company. A much better approach and habit to get into is signing agreements on behalf of the company. For example, sign Firemark Media LLC by Gordon Firemark, managing member. That signals directly and clearly that the company is the party that's entering the agreement, and the individual is acting as the company's representative. It's a simple habit that strengthens the business structure. Now, mistake number 3 is a big issue because creators produce intellectual property, the podcast episodes, the show title, the artwork, the video library, the written content. These things can become valuable assets over time. But sometimes creators form the LLC and then they forget to move those assets into the company. And they forget to make sure that the new assets they're creating are created under the company's umbrella. The brand could still be owned personally, a trademark filed personally, copyright registrations listing the individual creator. Meanwhile, the business itself is operating through the LLC, and that creates confusion about who actually owns the core assets. Often, the better approach is to assign those assets to the company. The brand belongs to the company. The content belongs to the company. The intellectual property becomes part of the business itself. It's an asset on the books of the business, which makes the structure much cleaner and easier to manage as the business grows. Now, the fourth mistake, another common oversight, is skipping making an operating agreement. Now, many states don't even require that an LLC file an operating agreement with the state. So creators assume that it's optional. But the operating agreement is actually one of the key internal documents that the company will have. It outlines things like who owns this company, how are decisions made, how are profits distributed, what happens if one of the owners leaves. Even for a single member LLC, the operating agreement can really clarify how the company operates. It shows that the business has structure and intention behind it, which again reinforces that separation between the individual and the business. And in most places, if you don't have an operating agreement, state law will apply a default set of rules. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want a bunch of state legislators deciding how my business is supposed to run, especially when they made those decisions on the default rules 30 or 40 years ago when the LLC law was first implemented and enacted. Now, the world has changed in that time, so most of what we're doing in media today wasn't even a glimmer of an idea back then. So it makes sense to get your operating agreement done right. Now, mistake number 5 is the final mistake. It's more of a mindset issue, really. It's treating the LLC like it's just a formality, paperwork, something that they file once and then forget. But a company is much more than just a form or a bit of paperwork. It's the operating structure of the business. Modern media moguls treat their businesses differently. The company owns the brand, receives the revenue, signs the deals, enters the partnerships, and the company becomes the platform that supports that creator's growth and all the other business adventures it goes on. When the company is used consistently, the business becomes more organized, more professional, and easier to scale. So now let's take a zoom out look for a moment. The conversation here really isn't about the paperwork. It's about thinking like a business owner. If you're building a podcast, if you're building a YouTube channel, if you're building a brand and an audience around your content, well, you're not just creating media, you are building a business. Modern media moguls understand that the structure behind the business matters just as much, if not more, than the content itself. The structure holds the brand, the revenue, the relationships, and when the structure is used properly, it really supports long-term growth. Now, if you're thinking about building your podcast into a real business, I have a resource that can help you. It's called the Legal Checklist for Podcasters, and it walks you through the key legal and structural pieces that creators should have in place as their shows grow. You can download it at podcasterchecklist.com. It's just a simple guide to help make sure your creator business is built on a solid foundation. Now, in the next episode of Legit Podcast Pro, we're going to talk about something that causes more disputes in creator businesses than almost anything else. Collaborations, co-host relationships, creative partnerships, and the agreements that should exist before the project even launches. Sometimes I refer to this as the podcast prenup. If you've ever thought about starting a podcast with a partner or teaming up with somebody, you'll want to hear this one. So I'll see you there. That's next week on Legit Podcast Pro. In the meantime, I'm Gordon Firemark, wishing you the best and encouraging you to get out there, keep on podcasting, and making great content. Thanks a lot.